thinking links with courage. When I have developed good thinking habits, and I understand that for me to make quality decisions or to assign quality meaning, I need to expose myself to rich data, I need to expose myself to the narratives of others, then I have an opportunity to be courageous, because I start to live outside my comfort zone. And so it is that courage that enables us to right the wrongs, to speak out against the things that are happening that should not be happening, things that we have normalized that should not have been normalized. Courageous people are often good thinkers. They have gotten themselves in those uncomfortable spaces.
Today, we get to spend some time with Vezi Mncwango as we explore our ability to think and what that means for us to live more courageously in this world today. This is Let's Talk Courageous Communication, and I'm Telana and Vezi. So today in Let's Talk Courageous Communication, we are going to be exploring thinking. And the person that came to mind when I wanted to do this was Vezi Mncwango. I've been watching Vezi talk a lot online around our ability to think and our need to think critically and develop our ability actually to use this cognition ability. We call it that. And really, Vezi, to bring you in here, I think you have a fascination with our thinking ability and how it impacts our lives in so many ways. So just tell us the story of how this fascination came about and where it's led you to today.
Yeah, no, Telana, firstly, thank you for inviting me on your podcast, and I look forward to exploring this fascination of mine, which I believe is not only something to be fascinated about, but I think it's something that all of us need to be talking about, because how we think, how we do cognition ultimately affects the quality of the decisions that we make, and therefore the consequences that we get in life. And so how did I come to be attracted to this topic? This was back in my professional leadership days, and I had been volunteering for an organization, a youth development organization. I was fairly young then. I was probably, I would say, around midpoint in my career. I had been a chair of this organization as well as my normal professional job. It had been really an intense process. And what happened is this organization that I was chairing, we had to retrench everyone because the budget dwindled. And so I found myself, even though I was the chairperson, having to actually go in the office, do some work, as well as holding my normal job. And so I burnt out in the process. And so as I burnt out, I remember thinking I need help because I am not coping. And so that's when I got an idea, and was actually suggested by someone, to get some coaching. And that's when, incidentally, that's also when I met you, Telana. And so I then went, through a coaching process. through this coaching process, what actually happened to me, and for me, it was a profound experience. Because through the coaching process, I think what it enabled me to pay attention to is, number one, how was I processing my environment? How was I processing the experiences that I had had? And you gave me a book titled Figuring People Out. And so I read this book and I was absolutely gobsmacked by how the mind works, the meta programs. And I thought, you know what? I think this is what I want to do in life. I want to help people understand this. Because I was convinced that had I had this understanding in my role as the chairperson, in my role as, in my professional space, I would have been much more effective in what I was doing. And so that's how I got into this whole area of how we think, how we make meaning, and the impact that it has on our lives. So yeah, that's so in a sense, you played almost a catalytical role in that.
Yeah, I actually do remember that time, and I'm so glad that it did play an impact, because now I see you now you've become an author and you're a leadership coach, and your company is actually called the Thought Coach, which I find very, very useful, very interesting, because you have a way of explaining our thinking styles, our cognition, all these different terms that we're going to explore a bit, and the impact it has on conversations, on the way we perceive things in our lives and all of that. That is just, I can see the impact it's having just through, the conversations you have with people on, say, Facebook. So if anyone wants to get in on that, you need to just start following Vezi on Facebook. But let's try and put this into a way we can grasp, right? Because we have this ability to think, and it's what makes us unique as human beings, is this cognition. So what do we mean really by thinking, by cognition? Are they the same things? Thinking style,
Yeah.
critical thinking. So just give us a bit of a terminology breakdown, I suppose.
Yeah. No, and it's a good place to start, Telana. I think of it that it's the same thing we do when we talk about walking. Most of us that have the privilege to have legs, we can walk, but we've got differing levels of fitness. Some people can do a 20-kilometer walk and still be able to come onto the other side strong and fit, and some of us can barely do that 20-kilometer walk. So yeah, I like to use the best way for me to illustrate what is thinking, what is cognition, and the difference between the two is to use one of my favorite metaphors. And in this metaphor, there is an old man who's merrily driving down a farm road on a beautiful summer's day. And he is looking out, and it's beautiful, birds chirping in the sky. And he's driving merrily, and he starts to notice that there's an oncoming car that is driving a little faster than what he would consider safe on a farm road, and it's picking up a lot of dust. And he starts thinking, who would be driving so fast? It's a weekend, and they are causing a lot of dust around here. So as this oncoming car gets closer, the driver in the other car slows down. But as the car passes, there's a small fleeting window period that the two drivers are able to see each other. And as he looks who is in the car, the driver rolls down the window and manages to only say one thing that she had in that fleeting period of time, and she shouts, "Pig!" And so this old man, as he hears this, he thinks to himself, I mean, how could she call me pig? I mean, she's the one that's driving fast. She's the one that's causing up all the dust, and she dares call me pig. And so, and as he just thinks about it, he's fuming, and he accelerates. And of course, there's a lot of dust. And 100 meters down the road, he hits a pig. And so, in this metaphor, I think there's quite a number of insights about thinking and cognition that we can learn. The first one is that the process of thinking is this old man, as he just enjoys his day, and he takes in the beauty of the day, and he's processing all of what's going around him. That process of just the experience and processing all the data that's coming at you, that's thinking. Now, cognition is the meaning that he attaches to the event of this lady who is in the other car shouting pig. And so cognition is a process through which we attach meaning to the events that are external to us. And for me, those are the main differences between thinking and cognition. So yeah, I think for now, I'll pause there, because I think for that metaphor kind of illustrates how our cognition can lead to actions that, if we attach the wrong meaning to an event, we can end up taking inappropriate actions that may cause consequences that are inadvertent intentions, actions that we did not, or consequences that we did not intend.
Yeah, so if thinking is just like processing the sensory information, because our senses is what brings the information, allows our brain, whatever it is, our consciousness to think. Us, the I, that is doing the thinking. But then we add a layer of meaning to it, and that layer, adding the thinking about our thinking of sensory information, is the cognition part. There's a lot that obviously goes wrong.
Beautifully.
Thanks.
Yeah.
But there's a lot that
captured it
goes
quite
wrong.
well. Yes, exactly. Sorry, say that again.
I'm saying that there's a lot then that goes wrong in the way we attach meaning to that sensory information.
Yes.
And that's what I wanted to explore a bit with you about, is like, what are those things? Because we have then, there's a more terminology like cognitive biases, and we've got critical thinking as just a thing on its own. There's I know I'm looking here for the word again, the heuristics. You speak a lot
the
about
heuristics.
Heuristics.
Yes.
Yes. Heuristics.
Yes.
So
you're absolutely
let's talk about
right.
what goes wrong. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. There's a lot that may go wrong in our process of taking out the data that coming at us, and I think you've captured it well, and adding that layer of meaning because ultimately the experience, the emotions that are triggered within us are based not on the event itself, but on that layer of meaning that we overlay on the event. And so in this instance, there is an event which a driver is warning this old man about a danger that's down the road. But because of the meaning that he chooses to attach to that event, he ends up getting into an accident of hitting a pig. And so, what's gone wrong? And I think that's a point you're getting to. So, what is it that's gone wrong? So, how is it that this old man attaches the kind of meaning that he has on this event? And so, and this is where I think we need to understand that the process of meaning making actually is a simple process where our memories, our past experiences, our emotions, when an event takes place, we've got what in coaching we call filters. And these filters are basically the processes whereby, as this data comes at us, we reference our past information, our past experiences, to see what is the association. So what is it about this event that I associate with in my past memories? And so that's where things go wrong, because sometimes the event has nothing to do with those past experiences or with those emotions that you associate with those experiences and memories. And so, however, our filters will go and look in the catalog of those past memories and experiences and associate those. And therefore, the meaning that I attach then to this event is based on how I have referenced those past experiences. So you also referred to what I often call cognitive heuristics. And heuristics really is a philosophical term that describes that all of us develop a kind of shorthand to how we interpret the world around us. And so these filters really, if you like, they are this set of cognitive heuristics that we've developed, or if you like, rules that we develop in our meaning making, that go something like, if this happens, it means this. So in the case of this old man, his association is that if somebody shouts pig, because probably in his memory or past experience, shouting pig at someone is an insult. He's not associating with that with a warning that is being issued. And so that's, I think, a good example of what can go wrong. And the reason why I like this metaphor is because often in life, some of the consequences of the meanings that we have attached to external events take long to materialize. And so we don't immediately realize that the consequence I am getting is directly related to the meaning I attach. But in this metaphor, we kind of see the kind of unraveling of this story. So yeah, that's I think in essence of the examples of what could go wrong.
So I mean, and a lot of what you're talking about, these filters, these heuristics,
because yeah, heuristics are actually quite unconscious. It's not like we're consciously aware of them. So that's, I think, what makes it so tricky. And what I found, and I think that's, I think what we both value is in the work that we do, we've learned about these things called filters. And I found just having the awareness that when I have an ability to think, because it happens so naturally, we don't even count it as a skill that we've got. And then two, that it's fallible. Our thinking is prone to, I can't think of another word, to be fallible, to make mistakes. So it works it's useful, those filters, because we need them in some way. So we need to make generalizations. We need to think quickly in immediate, in moments of threat. You don't have a long time to process what's happening. You've got to. So that's where our instinctual, I suppose, thinking kicks in. But at the same time, it's also, so I suppose the useful part is understanding that this is what happens with our thinking, because then I find it more useful then to be able to catch myself, say, hold on, have I gone into less useful thinking? Is a bias, popped up that it's not allowing me to see all the information. So therefore, I'm jumping to conclusions. I'm getting triggered. I'm feeling insulted when I'm not actually. Am I really understanding what this person's saying? Or has my filtering of information stopped me? So and maybe you can just give us some ideas on how to be aware of our thinking and its fallibility, but also its strength to improve, because it impacts our life so much. I don't know if you got some examples there, but also just to, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely on point, Telana. And I like the term that you've used, fallibility. Our thinking is fallible in the sense that not all events that are occurring now have an association with the events of the past or memories of the past. And so in our brains or in our filters, associative processing, we need to always be aware that some of what we need to process are actually new experiences. And so if we are not open to those new experiences, when we only associate them with what has happened in the past or our memories, we are significantly limiting those new experiences. Almost we are making our memories and past experiences the ceiling of the meaning of what these new experiences might be. There's a brilliant book by Daniel Kahneman. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And so you alluded to the need for thinking fast, and you're absolutely right that there is a need and there are contexts where we need to think very quickly and make rapid decisions. And so the point that David Kahneman makes is that it is just as important to make time to think slow, precisely because not everything that is in our past experience or memories or emotions, not everything is relevant to this current experience, to what I'm experiencing now. Secondly, the point that David Kahneman makes is that there are assumptions and decisions that we have developed based on our past experience that are no longer relevant or no longer hold for the current set of circumstances. And so if I keep on interpreting, or if I keep on solutioning for my current challenges only on the basis of my past rules and assumptions and decisions, then I am limiting my ability to respond appropriately to my current environment. And so, and so your question also is saying, so how do we then develop this sense of awareness so that we don't get trapped in limiting ourselves to these new experiences or new challenges, and then using only, using our memories and past experiences as a kind of that becomes almost a limiting factor of what we experience. And I think this is something that this is a book that I would recommend, Thinking Fast and Slow by David Kahneman, because he develops some of the ideas of some ideas for practices on how you can think slow. So the one thing that I would say about the maintaining that awareness, I think, is, in a sense, the awareness that change over time leads to our old assumptions and our old memories, and whatever decisions we might have made in the past. It makes the process of change over time may make those decisions, and even tools that might have worked at a particular time, maybe when you started out work, and now you've got 20 years under your belt, and they are just tools that become irrelevant. And so the first thing is really to be aware that the factor of time significantly changes the circumstances and the challenges, the terrain that we're navigating. And therefore, we need to always be aware that thinking fast is for those rapid, quick decisions, but we do need to pause and understand that we need to revisit that rule set, or those cognitive heuristics, that shorthand on how we make meaning. We do need to revisit and ask ourselves, what has changed, or what might have changed that may render some of my old assumptions irrelevant.
Yeah, I like that. So it's like almost pausing and reflecting on our assumptions, and the awareness, one, that we have them or what they might be, and then there's another layer almost of thinking about those assumptions, questioning, are they relevant still? Yeah. Because it also comes out a lot in decision making. You spoke there a bit about problem solving. Like we often can't solve today's problems with 20, 30 years ago's experiences. The world has changed so much, and problem solving is, for me, very related to decision making. We have to, because so many of us actually battle with making decisions. So wondering what some people overthink. They get stuck in this spiral of overthinking things, so therefore they never make a decision, they never move forward. And then there's the other extreme of impulse decision making. They're quick to decide stuff and they don't bring enough thought to it. So what are some of the mistakes that we maybe make in our thinking and our decision making, that learning these about our cognition and our thinking could help us to make better decisions?
Yeah. So there's another book that I'm currently reading. It's by John Kay and Mervyn King. It's called Radical Uncertainty. And there is a point that I really like, which they make about about tackling challenges, and particularly in an uncertain world. And so the whole book is around how do you navigate uncertainty, particularly in corporate leadership. And so the point they make is that the number one skill that any 21st century leader needs to develop is the understanding of what is going on here. So whenever you tackle a problem or you have a problem to solve or you are solutioning for something, we need to have this capability of understanding what's going on. And I think the mistake that we make, and I think we see this all the time, whether it's in politics or in corporate or even within the societal issues, what we see all the time is people looking at the new challenges through the lens of what has been navigated in the past. And I'm sure you've heard people saying, in the old days, we used to do this, or we used to do that, as if there is some static progression through time. And so for me, I think that's the important thing to recognize, is that we need to learn. We need to learn to understand what's going on under its own merits and under its own set of the data, all the moving parts, the data of the moving parts, and then engage with that with a view of, so what does this mean and how do we solution for this, and not be tempted to always look at it through the lens of what was done in the past. Not that that is irrelevant, but it is only relevant if we have a good grasp of what is going on right now and why is it the way it is.
And then so that's very much in trying to gather the more useful information to then process to solve the problem. Anything about decision making, or do you think it's the same kind of process? Is when we're trying to make a decision, we've got to really get a sense of what it is now we're facing, and not be scared because we made bad decisions in the past, or
it's in very much, I think, how you stated it. It's, I think, what we need to appreciate is that the quality of the data that we gather or that we have access to it's what enables us to make quality decisions. And so typically, I think we've seen this, for example, in the way that corporates will develop products. And what we are learning from the process of, solutioning for the needs of customers, what is important is that there needs to be an ecosystemic understanding of the problems that the consumer or the customer is experiencing. So what is the problem that we are solving for? And so if you look at corporates, there are corporates that are that sell to make profit. And then there are corporates that have evolved from that sell to address the need of their customer. But then I think where I sense the direction of how we solution for customers, there are corporates then that develop solutions that are for the common good, for the whole society. So I'm not just solving the needs of my customer, because I can give customers plastics to carry their groceries from the store, but is that for the common good of the whole society? And so where we are moving now is corporates that are saying, how do I develop solutions that address my customer needs, but that are still good for the whole society? So back to what you said earlier, therefore, how does this happen? It's dependent on the quality of the data that I gather. So for me to decide what is the best optimal solution to solve for this problem, the more ecosystemic I become, the more expansive I gather the data, the more I am able to make a quality decision. Another example, I think a more personalized example, is when in the way that we manage our relationships, whether it's at work or at home, in our families, what would look like for me to make an ecosystemic decision, instead of saying he or she did this to me. I may expand my data set, because if my focus is on the data set of the behavior I observed or experienced, I am limited to that data set to decide how I'm going to respond to that. However, if I consider what might it be that caused them to act in a particular way, to speak to me in a particular way, I am bringing more data. And therefore, that expanded understanding enables me to then say, oh, I understand why she might have done that. She had a rough day. This says that had happened. And so I have a perspective. The decision I made in that instance is going to be substantially different from the decision if I reacted purely on the basis of the data that I took from the behavior or the experience. And so the more ecosystemic we become in the way we bring in the data that we use for decision making, the more quality our decision becomes.
And that touches also a bit on, I think, diversity, those examples, because that's what came to my mind in terms of, the communication. We from our set of filters, our thinking style, we add a certain meaning to what we think we've heard. And we said we need to maybe be aware that we assume things and question those assumptions, because that will bring in more data. But there's also a place then for diversity, because the way I think was very, you and I may have similarities in the way we think because of our training and that, but also the way we think is very different because of our cultures and backgrounds and the experiences we've had in our personal lives. And I think today we are so scared of having a diverse view in our presence. It really impacts, so it creates a lot of conflict. And conflict comes often from just not understanding that person has a different view, and that it's both of views can coexist, or that we're misunderstanding that person's view because of all of these biases or the way we think. So how do we embrace diversity? What would help us, not only for our own thinking to be more diverse, but to be with others that are different?
Yeah, I mean, I like that lens that you are bringing into this conversation, because I think there's a particular frame or narrative that diversity has been processed, in a sense that in some quarters, diversity is becoming a kind of a schism. But I think it's the way the narrative of diversity has been framed. And here's how, and it's very much along the lines that you started framing it. Diversity is opening ourselves up to more expansive data for us to have access to, so that in the way that we process around us, the world around us, it is not just informed, I think what you referred to earlier, it's not just informed by our social formation or the culture, the way we grew up, or even our education. But what we do when we expose ourselves to divergent or diverse experiences, what we do is that expansion of the data that we have access to enables us to deepen the quality of the decisions that we make. It enables us to be more ecosystemic in terms of how do we solution. And I think why this is important is because as a humanity, we need to understand that we are navigating the same waters. And so we can't think that because they are different from me, they have their own world. We share the same space. The impact that I'm making in my ecosystem, in my backyard, if I don't take out the bin, even though I may have a fence, or if my neighbor decides that they're going to pile up their rubbish, the mice are going to eventually affect all of us. So for me, similarly, diversity is really an understanding that if someone who is very different from me is navigating challenges that may seemingly have nothing to do with me, we need to understand that eventually we share the same space. Those problems may eventually come to affect us all, overtake us all. And so the more diverse, therefore, we think or we expose ourselves to more diverse ways of thinking, the more diverse backgrounds, whether it's geographical, race, culture, creed, the better quality decisions we make as we solution. So that as I solution, I'm not just addressing my own problems, but down the road, eventually I find that I might have solved my problems, but down the road, we have a societal catastrophe that affects all of us. And so when we think together like that and embrace diversity, our solutions are for the whole of humanity, not just for me or my company or my community or my people. And so that's why I think understanding diversity in that frame is, I feel, eminently empowering, and just how it then improves the quality of our decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something quite interesting there. You talked about the frame. So the way I framed that introduction. What do you mean by that? Because I often talk about it as well, that it's almost like it's or the frame of a picture changes the way you interpret that picture.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so how do we use framing? What is it maybe, and how can we use it to help us improve our communication, especially when it's around a difficult topic?
I like that question a lot, Telana, because I find that there are issues where people have brilliant ideas, but the way they communicate them, the framing, triggers people in all the wrong ways, and ends up just kind of sprawling conflict, and creating misunderstanding. And so I like the picture that you are drawing about, the frame can change how people see the picture, or the experience people take from the picture. And so why for me framing becomes important, and this is actually intricately intertwined into this conversation, both about the data you bring in, and the diversity that you open yourself to, because the way I frame whatever it is that I want to present to influence you, or to manage a stakeholder, or to manage a relationship. If my frame is ignorant of the experiences of the other, I may trigger them into, as I said, in a very wrong way. And whatever it is that I might be communicating, therefore, kind of gets lost in the process. And so, for example, to make a practical example, I might have, for example, taken out my wife for dinners in the past to manipulate, or to sell her narratives which turned out to be false, or whatever the case might be. And so I might get to a point where I say, that was wrong, and I want to address this issue, to say, what, I've been manipulative and whatever. But if my frame is, I need to talk to you, can we go out and sit down over dinner and talk about this? So that framing then, in a sense, then triggers, because the frame I'm using is very much, what has punctuated her experience. And so it will trigger her to say, oh, so you are still perpetuating what you've done in the past. And so this is why I think, Telana, it's important for us to open ourselves up in understanding other people's experiences, to expose ourselves. So whether it's someone that's different from me, or my customer, or someone I'm in relationship with, the bottom line is that if I don't have rich data about their experience, whatever I am solutioning for, brilliant as my solutioning might be, but if I frame it in a way that's not, I think, sensitive to the context I might be lost in the process. It might dissipate. Worse still, it might be completely misunderstood. So yeah, framing is, I think, so important, but we can't do it. We can't do it unless we invest ourselves in understanding the narratives of others. And so you were also touching on communication. So our ability to communicate with others is, so often we communicate to convey data from us to others, but that's just conveyance of data. But if we want to influence, so to communicate for influence, it's important for us to be invested in understanding the stories, the narratives, where others have come from, and that way we become effective communicators.
Yeah, that's very wise words there. Because I want to, I was asking, one of my questions here was how we can apply this thinking about our thinking to living more courageously. How does our thinking impact our ability to be more courageous in difficult situations? So we touched a bit on the communication part, but I don't know what your thoughts are about courage and thinking. How does thinking impact our courage?
Yeah, another brilliant question. And in a sense, I think that courage often occurs when we are operating outside of our comfort zones. We find courage because we've been thrust into terrains that demand that we be courageous. And so as we speak about thinking and the need to expose ourselves to ecosystemic data, the narratives of others, the experiences of the other, whether it's my customer, whether it's my stakeholder, whether it's my spouse. As long as I'm sitting in my comfort zone, I am more tempted to rely on the past memories, past experiences to sustain my comfort zone. However, there's something about exposing myself to the narratives of others, to the experiences of others. There's always something about that kind of bumps us out or nudges us out into an uncomfortable space, because suddenly you have to you start to realize that my experiences are very different. And a good example of this is, and this is another favorite topic of mine, is male privilege. Male privilege affords men in society authority that they have not earned. And so they get premium treatment in some areas, and particularly in the African context, they get given preeminent roles that sometimes they don't even have the experience to fulfill. And so when I have a conversation with men about male privilege, and we start to talk about how women leaders, for example, experience the leadership in a corporate terrain, and they start to be exposed to different experiences, that always ushers them into a dissonance, because they suddenly discover that the way that I thought the things worked in my world is not the way that they work in someone else's world. And so now that then transports us to courage. So courage, and as I said, courage is often born in the place of dissonance. When I'm thrust out of that comfort zone. So even when we talk about courageous conditions, it is addressing those things that have ushered us out of our comfort zones. And so courage, therefore, is, I believe, born from that place when you start to realize that things are not what they seem to be. And so we can head straight, try to restore ourselves back to our comfort zones, or we can ask, what can I do about that? How can I, for example, how can I speak out against gender injustice in the corporate space? So if I am a man and suddenly I get exposed to the experiences of women leaders in corporate, I can be courageous and say, we need to work on dealing with those challenges. Or I can scale it back to my comfort zone. So for me, that's how I think thinking links with courage. When I have developed good thinking habits, and I understand that for me to make quality decisions or to assign quality meaning, I need to expose myself to rich data. I need to expose myself to the narratives of others. Then I have an opportunity to be courageous because I start to live outside my comfort zone. And so it is that courage that enables us to right the wrongs, to speak out against the things that are happening that should not be happening, things that we have normalized that should not have been normalized. So I do really think that courageous people are often good thinkers. They have gotten themselves in those uncomfortable spaces.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, because that's also an example of a courageous conversation, to have that kind of conversation with your clients, and for them then with their colleagues when they've gained that awareness. And so I want to ask you then on a personal note a bit more about, because courageous conversations is what we're all about today. Can you share an example of how a courageous communication has helped you to achieve a personal professional goal in your personal life?
Yeah, and really, this is very much linked to what I shared earlier. In the past, I would say 5 years in my professional life in leadership coaching, I started working with women leaders. And I think what had happened to me was that my male privilege had blinded me to the fullest appreciation of what a lot of women navigate in the corporate space, often finding themselves being compelled to assimilate themselves to an inner boys culture, an inner circle of boys culture, which still subsists in many corporate organizations. And so as I began to work and coach women leaders, and as I started to wrap myself around their narratives, navigating this corporate space, that's, if you like, rigged by patriarchy. I started realizing that dealing with gender injustice, dismantling, disempowering, or exclusionary patterns of patriarchy. Often I would have thought of this as something that, women leaders must stand up for and fight for. And I realized that, hey, we can't expect people that are being pushed to the margins, to the periphery, to be the ones that do the fighting. And so what has that led to me to do is, in my professional space, especially when I work with leaders, corporate leaders, is to have the conversations about the role of men and their, given their privilege in dismantling, disempowering patterns, exclusionary patterns of patriarchy in the corporate space. And so often these conversations can get very difficult. Again, not because men are intentionally malicious, but because there is a deep level of blindness until you expose yourself to those narratives. There are deep levels of blindness. And so when you start having the conversation about the role that we as men need to take in dismantling patriarchy, what happens is there's this almost instinctual defense. And so we then have to have these very difficult conversations. And fortunately, with most African men, I can draw a parallel to race in South Africa, and they start to say, oh, yeah, okay, we see how that these are parallels, and why it's important that we keep these conversations going, and we keep up the responsibility, or we take up that responsibility, so that we don't have our women leader counterparts continuing to experience the what they often experience, being excluded on the basis of gender. So that's just one of those conversations that I think has become quite important, but also for me is something that I would say is courageous, and probably the most courageous thing I've said, and I think it led a lot of people to a deep sense of deep dissonance, was I said, I am a feminist, and I think everyone should be one.
Yeah. So what has, besides what you've shared already, because I think if I think back of our conversation, there's been a lot there, like framing and understanding that the context, the other person's background and all of that, and how I've been open more to diversity, getting more data will help us to have these conversations. Just, is there anything else that has helped you that you could add to that? Just one more tip. So those of us that are also feminists, yes, those of us that are also feminists, if we use that as the example, because I think we need to have way more courageous conversations in this world. That's the only way we're going to get things right and make a difference. So what else would help us, using that context of saying I'm a feminist and we all should be? What else could help us to have that conversation? Any other point?
Telana, one thing that I kind of have distilled over the years is the need to do what I call hang out with the thought leaders. And so there are brilliant minds in South Africa, in Africa, the rest of the world, who have invested themselves in studying whatever area that you can think of. It could be social injustice, gender injustice, economic injustice. And so one thing that I think can be really powerful in bringing in that data is really to engage the works of those thought leaders, because they have, in a sense, it's not just any data. They've actually taken that area of study, they've systematized it, and then they present it to us in a cohesive way. And so I think, as you know, we all are kind of running on our own lane, but it becomes important that we expose, we, in a sense, we hang out with these thought leaders in reading or podcasts, and often, you know, what I find is a lot of people will read books, but what I'm referring here is not just any book. You want to expose yourself to those people who have really invested in studying that area, whatever of subject of your interest. And so they've earned the right of being called thought leaders. And I do think that the more we do this, we're going to find that enriches that our decision-making process. It enriches how we frame our narratives. It enriches how we interpret the world around us, and ultimately the kind of decisions we make, the solutions we come out with. So hang out with the thought leaders.
Absolutely. So I actually see you as a thought leader on thought. So I'm so glad we got to hang out today. If other people would like to hang out with you, how could they get in touch with you?
Yeah, by all means, I am open to engaging and having conversation. Two best ways. The one is the one that you've already mentioned earlier, is to connect with me on Facebook. That's where I'm most active. But also you could go to my blog, and my blog is uvezi.com. So uvezi.com. And you could connect with me on the blog. Otherwise, friend me on Facebook. I'm more than happy to be challenged and to have conversation. Otherwise, I am also, all my contact details are available in my blog. If there's anything that anyone wants to engage me with, you can drop me an email.
Great, and I'll have links to all of those in the show notes as well. So in closing, then I like to ask everyone, what is the conversation that you believe we need to be having more of in this world to make the world a better place?
Yes, and I think it's very much along the lines that we've been talking about. It's for us to challenge ourselves on the quality of our thinking. And so from how a lot of us processed all the narratives that were going around during the pandemic, owing to COVID, and what happened is you saw a lot of keyboard warriors on social media. We saw people who were writing and engaging in conversations about things that they had not done homework on. And so I think the courageous conversation that all of us ought to be having as humanity is to hold each other accountable for the quality of our thinking. Whether it's our spouses, our children, it is, to use the words of our ex-president, Thabo Mbeki, when he would be in an interview, they would ask him and he would say, in querying a question, where do you get that? And in a sense, I think we need to be asking of each other more of such a question. Where do you get that? Is it, I think we are doing a disservice to ourselves as humankind when we perpetuate and we engage in narratives that could be just spins from people who want to manipulate us. But I think that we really need to invest ourselves in more quality thinking, so that if I get the question about where did you get that, I may be able to say where that data comes from and how it may have been systematized, or how the research was done. And I think that if we can have more of those conversations, we become more accountable to each other about the quality of our thinking and ultimately the quality of our lives and relationships as humankind.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Vezi, for sharing that. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, and thank you. And I just want to remind you that this is a catalyst. All this journey, this trajectory of my journey is a catalyst of our coaching journey together. And I will forever treasure that. So thank you for giving me an opportunity once more to hang out with you once again.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Vezi, and I do hope anyone who's listening and watching here that it becomes a catalyst, our conversation, for you to go out into the world and think more critically to improve your thinking ability. So I'm Telana Simpson, and this has been Let's Talk Courageous Conversation. And let's all go now and improve our thinking. See you next time.
Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you, Telana.